Friends, listen, I'm going to tell you that this recording, this podcast, this episode is going to be a little bit tough to talk about. I may get emotional. I don't know. But I'm going to tell you that learning a lesson from a 6-year-old can be really challenging sometimes because you think that you potentially have it all together sometimes when you're trying to parent, right? For those of you that are parents, for those of you that aren't, maybe one day you'll know if you have nieces and nephews, maybe you've already been put in a situation where you're like, whoa, wasn't expecting that. So I do want to give just a little disclaimer. I am going to mention what happened in the Christian school in Nashville last week. It's little ears. It's not going to be anything graphic or anything, but I am going to mention things that were utilized in that incident. So I just want to kind of preface that and let you know. So I found out what happened in Nashville the day of my sister and I were talking because she doesn't live too far from Nashville. And so she sent me the information and we were chatting back and forth, and it was just so heavy on my heart. And I'm a person of faith and person of belief. So I stopped and I prayed. I prayed for the school. I prayed for the families. I prayed for the children. I prayed for the teachers, the faculty, that area. What a difficult situation. And so I just stopped what I was doing and I prayed. And I also, when I prayed, I just thought about, and I prayed about like, okay, Lord, like, how am I going to approach this with my kids? Obviously it's a little bit, I don't want to say it's easier with a 15-year-old. Well, he's almost 15. He thinks he's 25, but anyway, that's another episode for another time. But my almost 15-year-old, I wouldn't say easier to have a conversation with him, but he certainly understands things a little bit better and has more knowledge about things like this than my 6-year-old. However, I picked them up from school and I said, hey guys, did you hear about anything that happened today, in Nashville in Tennessee? And they were like, no. I'm like, okay. So then the next day I am talking with them and I said, hey guys, did you hear about anything that happened? I mentioned it to you yesterday. Wasn't sure if the school talked about it. They do go to a Christian school. And so Jace says, he's my 6-year-old. He says, oh yeah, my teacher said that something bad happened and we stopped and we prayed for the school and the families. And I'm like, okay, great. That's wonderful. And my oldest, he says, yeah, Mom, I know what happened yesterday. I said, okay. And so I talked with him in code, talked with my 14-year-old a little bit, and then I kind of just let that be. And then later that night, Tuesday night, and this is kind of the meat of what I was getting to. I kind of wanted to set up the story a little bit. If you hear any noise in the background, it's probably my doodle, so just ignore her. So, and the dishwasher's going, all the things. Real life here, guys. This is real life. This is in my house. I don't have a studio. This is in my house. And it's blurred because it's a hot mess. If you can see all that garbage back there, sorry about that. Anyway, it's real life here. So I'm tucking my 6-year-old in and I said, hey, honey, I know you said that your teacher talked about what happened today or yesterday. Did she say anything specific? And he said, I can't remember what the specifics were, but he did know what happened, that someone hurt children and I said, well, how do you feel? And that there was a shooter and the shooter was captured. And I said, well, how do you feel about all of that? And he's like, this is really hard to explain or tell you, Mom. And I was like, okay. I said, but I'm here for you and I want to hear what you have to say and we can talk about it because I know this is not easy. And he said, Mom, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, and I'm sad. And I'm like, okay. But he didn't stop there, you guys. My 6-year-old is what you would call emotionally intelligent. He's very much aware of his feelings and he's not afraid to explain them to you and why he feels that way. And part of that is from me as his mother, but the other part is just a gift from God because I can't explain some of the emotional intelligence that a 6-year-old has at his, it baffles me some days. And so I said, okay, honey, why are you angry, frustrated, and sad? He said, I'm angry because it really should have never happened. And those people shouldn't have died. And it shouldn't have Like, it shouldn't have happened that way. I go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. He said, I'm sad because, the police officers did their job, but they shot the shooter, and maybe they could have just arrested them and given them another chance. You can't see my face on the podcast, but on YouTube, my eyeballs got wide and I am in shock, because when he said that, we're going to elaborate on that in a second. So 1, he's angry because it should have never happened. No one should have died. 2, he was sad because the shooter should have been given a second chance. And 3, he was frustrated because he's a child and it could happen to him. And he's a little scared, he says, at the end. Now, listen, I don't know too many adults that could explain their feelings like that around an incident of such nature, okay? And such magnitude, really, right? And so I was just floored about this, my little boy, and the fact that he could explain it so well. And so we talked through that. And I said, honey, I said, it's really gracious and loving of you to think of someone that hurt others that way, that they could have a second chance. And he's like, yeah, Mom, God gives us second chances all the time. And just because they did something really bad doesn't mean that God won't give them a second chance. Listen, you don't know how many tears I had in my eyeballs, and was just trying to listen and talk through with him. And then we talked about his anger and how it's okay to be angry and have a righteous anger like that. Like, God gets angry when his children are hurt. It's okay, because we are made in God's image and we have the mind of Christ, or hopefully we do, and we're on our way there. But it's okay that we get angry at things like that. We just don't want to stay angry, but we need to talk through them so that we have an understanding of why we have anger and why we're angry about it. And the frustration of, him knowing and having the knowledge that this happened at a Christian school to kids. He's a kid in a Christian school. And so for him to put those two things together just floors me. And, the fact that he's so gracious and loving and kind and explained all of this to me. So anyway, guys, 1, I would tell you, to nurture your children's emotions and feelings that way and allow them to explain things to you. Gone are the days where we tell little boys that they don't need to cry or they need to man up, or even little girls, right? Oh, what are you whining about? Whatever. Don't say things like that to your kids, and don't put your emotions over onto them. And I wasn't planning on this being like a parenting episode, but I'm going to tell you that I see these things and I hear these things, and it just pangs my heart that, a child isn't allowed to express, what's bothering them. That was heavy, you guys. And things like that, when they happen, and our kids are not immune to these things. Like, I think about so many things, and, the pandemic alone, I know it's like nobody wants to talk about COVID and the pandemic anymore, but it's a part of our history. And people are still getting it, mind you, but it's a part of our history, and our kids went through that. If you have young children, they went through that. And so I think about my little boy being in kindergarten, having to wear a mask majority of the time, 80% of the time he was in, kindergarten. And my oldest having to go through that, in middle school. And so those kinds of things are really tough on our kids. And so please do not expect, if you think about the hard time you have as a parent, as a mom, as a wife, as an employee. I'm a fire wife, I'm a nurse, I'm a mom, all of those things. I wear hats and alternate those all consistently. And I think about how many times I have difficulty expressing myself, controlling my emotions, all of those things. And I'm an adult. I'm a 40-year-old woman, and I have a hard time with those things. So why would I expect my child not to have a hard time with those things? And why would I expect them not to talk about it? That's not fair. And I know this world isn't fair, but it's not for us to decide if they should speak about it or not. We should allow them to let that happen, right? We should allow them to discuss these things that they need help with, that they need understanding about. And so anyway, I just had to share that story. It just had been sitting on my heart for so long. And I told Adam, I said, my husband, I said, I don't want to forget to share this. I need to share it. And I had plans to record it like all last week. And last week was just nuts. So anyway, I had some quiet time and I wanted to, just talk about these things. It is so hard, to just process these things. And so the title of this message is Processing Your Emotions from a Child's Perspective. That's just kind of a subtitle, from a child's perspective. So I just, man, it really did take me back. And I, one, was so proud of him. And two, was like, sometimes I just think about how honored and privileged I am to be the mother of amazing boys. And, I've talked about the struggles we've had with our teenager, but that doesn't mean he's not sweet and he's not a good kid. He just has, we all have struggles. And so we're just trying to help him manage those things that he doesn't know how to manage. He's not an adult, so he doesn't know how to make adult decisions, right? And so I have to talk these things through, as a wife, and, we have to talk about these things sometimes. And, parenting is not for the faint of heart, you guys, but don't forget to discuss like the things that you think that your husband should know or understand, or that, guys, I'm like, if you don't see my eyeballs, it's because I'm talking and I'm like rolling up my wire earbuds. Squirrel. So, don't forget to communicate these things, one, with your children. Don't forget to tell these things like to your spouse. It's hard as a fire wife sometimes. Like, you think you tell your spouse something and you're like, hey, honey, did I tell you about? And he's like, no. I'm like, oh God, that happened like a week ago. Fire wives, you feel me? I know. So, maybe keep a running note, to share these and communicate these things with one another so that you're both aware of what's going on in your household. And I would say this too, to kind of close out this kind of shorter episode, but just to kind of close out this episode, like, don't expect someone to know what you're thinking or feeling. That goes back to a couple episodes ago when I talked about spring break or bust, when I discussed about not expecting people to know your game plan that you have up here and you haven't let it come out of your mouth. Don't expect people to know what you want. Okay. But make sure you have like a running, dialogue, whether it's via text or you have an ongoing note with one another. Like my husband and I share a note in our iPhone. And if we need to talk about things, we just add things. We put the date, like whatever the date is that we add it, we make sure we add that because the date changes depending on when you open up the note. So you put you put the date on there and write down what you want to discuss. And, the goal is to discuss it within, maybe a couple of days, not like 2 months, which has happened to us before. Anyway, thank you for being here. I'm so grateful for you all. And listen, if you go to my website, enlightcoach.live, especially if you're a fire wife, I want you to get the freebie that I have there, but you can also just sign up for the emails and just follow along with what I'm doing. And that way you don't miss out on things. I did a webinar end of March. I was planning on doing one every 2 weeks. That's probably been back down to once a month. So stay tuned. I'm going to be updating those slides and you'll hear about the upcoming webinar end of April. And I'm just excited, for what God's doing and shifting and changing and moving in my life and where he has me positioned. Just the relationship that he's building between my husband and I. Like, we've been together, 14 years, almost 15 years, but we're constantly learning one another. Don't ever think that you have known someone just because you're with them for a long time. I don't even know myself, and I've been with myself 40 years. Hello? Okay. So don't expect your husband or your significant other or your partner or whoever to know you, okay? Because they ain't going to know you. They got their whole lives to know you, okay? So don't expect, no expectations, guys. When we put our expectations on other people, that sets us up for disappointment and them for failure. So don't do that to people. So nurture your children. If you have children, nurture the kids around you. If you don't have kids of your own, like, love on them, help them to discuss these things that are hard and challenging, and give them hope and encouragement. And I hope you have received hope and encouragement on this episode, and I look forward to talking to you next time.